Hello, everyone. How are you? Alexis Brooks here from Higher Journeys. And yes, I am back with another episode of Conscious Commentary. Well, now, I'm wondering, before I got on the air, I thought, I start the show pretty much every time with the same, well, hello there, everyone. Alexis Brooks here from Higher Journeys, back with a I hope you all are doing well wherever you may be on this little blue planet. I think I'll probably keep that one, but I'll tell you why I had to chuckle before I started this episode today, this little segment, because I'm doing something a bit different. I'm going to take a couple of minutes and explain before we get into the topic of the show, which, by the way, I'm going to put the title out there right now. Who are the ETs? What is ET contact? And what does all of this have to do with us? So, boom. There's the title. Now, let me digress for a minute. I want to set this up for you all. We're doing something a little bit different, journeyers. As you know, I typically do conscious commentary every other week, and alternately, I will have guests. So you've got conscious commentary twice a month and a long-form guest, special guest, every other week as well. And I decided to switch things up a little bit. I started thinking about conscious commentary and what this is all about. I mean, look, we're talking about the things that are most important to us. I'm trying to put subjects out there that you all are not only interested in, but want to take a bit further on your own journey and trying to unravel and unfurl what life is all about. Just a little thing. What life is all about. No guarantees that we'll come up with any definitive answer, but I say, you know what I say, explore the mystery. So in the spirit of that, I got to thinking yesterday, okay, perhaps conscious commentary could do good with a little retooling, upping the ante a little bit. And so I said to myself, look, we talk to so many profound, brilliant thought leaders on this planet, talking about the things that we so dearly love and want to learn more about. And we do a show and it's gone. Then we move on. We do a conscious commentary. That's typically not related. And then we move on. And everything that we're talking about, guys, warrants discussion beyond just the snapshot. And I know the show is an hour, typically for our guest shows, and conscious commentary a good bit less than that. But I thought, why not kind of weigh in on the discussion that was previously had with our last guest? Because invariably there will be subjects within the main frame of the conversation that we could get. You hear me say this all the time. Well, we can make a whole discussion out of that one point that the guest might illuminate for a bit, and then we move on. And so what I've decided to do, just to kind of cut to the chase, we're going to do conscious commentary weekly. I'm going to try this out, see how it goes. But what I'd like to do is, as you know, on Wednesdays, or as was the case before, every other Wednesday, we will feature a guest, and then the alternate weeks, as I said, conscious commentary. But what we're going to try, we're going to call this a pilot, is to have a brand new guest show every week. Drum roll, every week, not every other week. So we're going to be really doubling up on not only our guests, but conscious commentary. We're going also to do conscious commentary every Friday. Let me put it out there right now. Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. Our guest show will be every Wednesday. We're shooting for noon time Eastern. At noon Eastern time every Wednesday. The following Friday of the same week will be conscious commentary. Hence the reason why you're getting it today. As a follow-on to the discussion that we just had with our debut show with our featured guest. And again, I think it's because we are delving into such complex material most of the time. It's rare that I don't have a show that will take you down the rabbit hole. And I think it warrants more discussion. So this is what we're doing. We're tweaking a little bit. Just tweaking. We're going to test this out, see how it goes. Let me know, of course, what you think about what we're doing here. So, having set that up, I hope you all had a chance to hear what I am calling a wonderful, insightful, engaging, intriguing exchange with Mr. Whitley Strieber. We just had him on Wednesday. And I thought, as I was kind of pondering this idea of bulking up on shows, doing a guest show every week, doing a conscious commentary as a follow-on as well every week, I thought, okay, I need to, as always, as I'm producing my guest shows, obviously I'm listening and I'm taking copious notes to use in various venues. But what as I was listening to Whitley's show, and this will be the theme as I go forward with conscious commentary, is to pick or pluck something out of the conversation that really warranted a little bit more conversation, and have me sort of weigh in on my own here and see where we might take this. And so this is the case. This is what I did with Whitley's show. As I said at the beginning of this episode, I'm calling this "Who Are the ETs?" What, in fact, is ET contact? And what, most importantly, what does all of this have to do with us? This isn't a new question. I think we're all really trying to understand what this is all about. Who are these entities that are sort of euphemistically called ETs? You know, I like to use the term non-human intelligence, whatever the names may be. Obviously, this has got to be one of the most, if not the most loaded question on the planet. But I want to go into something that Whitley said. I started to play a clip for y'all as a part of this conscious commentary, but I think I want to have you go back, if you haven't already, please do yourself a favor and listen to Whitley's show, or the show where we featured Whitley, which I thought was extraordinary. Whitley's always articulate, eloquent, and so introspective, and he's so great at verbalizing his own thoughts to all of us to get us to think more. And this show was no exception. Here's the piece that I decided to sort of elaborate on and put into this episode. And it has to do with in order to understand who we are being visited by, assuming there is such, what will it take? And this started out in my conversation with him by my pointing out something that he had said that I actually used in a lecture that I had given previously, in which he talks about this whole thing being, without question, an enigma, this idea of ET contact, and to the extent to which we have it, of which it's so varied. But he says, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have the quote right in front of me, in order to understand the enigma, we need to understand ourselves, just to kind of boil it down. In order to understand what is happening to us, we need to perhaps understand what is happening by us. Now, this is me talking at this point. I have said something similar when I was interviewed for the book We Are the Disclosure by Miguel Mendonça, when he was asking, in a manner of speaking, what is the discovery in all of this we call our interaction with ET contact? And I said something similar in that the biggest discovery in all of this is self-discovery. So Whitley and I are kind of driving at the same thing. We are trying desperately to understand, the many of us who are talking about it and many who aren't, that are having some semblance of contact. What is going on? We're reaching so far outside of ourselves to understand this enigma. And the very thing that may have the ability to get us there is taking the time to understand who we are in this process. Now, I want to take this to the next level. This sounds a little bit cliche, I suppose. Let's understand ourselves before we can understand them. Okay, fine. But I want to take this to the next level and talk about, let me back up for a minute. Something that Whitley said that really kind of got me going on this tangent about understanding ourselves in order to understand the interaction and to understand the others, the visitors, as Whitley calls them. He gave a very brief and succinct anecdote about his beloved wife, who's been crossed over for several years now. And he speaks often of how she somehow is able to reach across the veil to send a message or messages that are so filled with wisdom and perennial wisdom, I would say, to Whitley. And one of the things that she said, I suppose in response to a thought that Whitley had been having, or even maybe a question that he had posed directly to her, because he says that he has conversation with her quite frequently, though from the invisible realm, or to the invisible realm. This was about the idea of God. He said, where most people think of God as outside of us, Annie feels differently. He called her Annie. He says that she said to him, Whitley, it's about self-realization, self-discovery. She said, and I'll quote here, when we see ourselves as we truly are, we see God. Everyone, most, I'm sure at some point, are searching for what God is, assuming that God is this force that exists independent of us and outside of us. And her purview, I suppose you could say from this vantage point, is simply, no, when we see ourselves as we truly are, we see God. Forgive me, I'm losing my voice a bit because I've been doing a lot of talking today. That got me to thinking, could this be applicable to our extreme curiosity about the visitors, about non-human intelligence? What if we were, and I'm not at all insinuating that the visitors are God, but again, that mystery, that force that we view as outside of ourselves, whether it be the source or others, an infinitude of others, might we take that same idea? When we see ourselves as we truly are, we'll begin to understand what those others are. This is a tough subject to tackle, and I don't know that I was hoping to keep this to 15 minutes. I'm almost there right now, and that's not going to happen. So I hope you'll hang with me. The question for me becomes, I think we're dealing with a lot of things, first of all, in terms of what this phenomenon is. But somehow I have always wondered, sure, absolutely, I think it is of utmost importance that we know thyself in order to know anything else that appears to be outside of ourselves. But one of the things that I have pondered, and I'm certainly not standing behind this as a belief, but a ponderance, how much of the phenomenon that we're a part of, this thing we call ET contact, now I'm going to jump here a bit, may actually be, in some cases, an externalization of our own psyche at some level. I'm talking about, I want to go back and mention an aphorism that many of us know, which simply says, as above, so below, as within, so without. Which means that where we may not be talking about a complete, well, let me back up here, because this is a little bit tangled. I've got to think about this before I even put it out there. I want to be clear that there are things that are outside of us, sure. Or at least this is how we perceive our world. There are some that would argue that nothing is outside of us, that all is one, yes. But it could very well be that an aspect of this phenomenon may be some form of a throw-off stemming from our own psyche. Again, this is complex to distill, certainly not, can't be done in this short time, and it's something that I'm throwing out there as a ponderance. It connects somehow, guys, to what Anne purportedly said to Whitley. When we see ourselves as we truly are, we see God. When we see ourselves, including the psyche, which is so mysterious, as it truly is, we begin to understand that which appears to be outside of us, including the beings, including the experiences of which the beings are a part. There's a quote that I was able to pluck out that somehow applies here, even tangentially. It's a quote by Carl Jung that simply says, and this isn't about ETs or God, but rather the psyche. It says, quote, "The world powers that rule over humanity, for good or ill, are unconscious psychic factors. We are steeped in a world that was created by our own psyche," end quote. As I read that quote, I thought to myself, I changed one thing. We are steeped in a reality that may have been created by our own psyche. That would include, first of all, it wouldn't preclude anything. It would include ET contact. And so if that's the case, using this sort of as a syllogism, could it be that, I'm going to just say conservatively, in some cases, that the beings that we feel that we're experiencing, we have a part in creating? Is it coming out of our own psyche? Now, this may be controversial to some of you, maybe many of you. Again, I'm not settled on this. It's just a ponderance, a thought that I have had. We don't know how reality is created. None of us do. We can only speculate. I think many of you listening to this show are beyond the idea that matter is what we're told it is, and we live in a sticks and stones world that's rigid and inflexible. I certainly feel that it's nothing like that. And so keeping that in mind, all the rules of engagement that we've come to abide by, we may have to toss, we may have to sort of reconsider, including how contact is happening and what we're communicating with. I'm going to give another example. This also came to mind in this ponderance of mine, this contemplation. And it has to do with ayahuasca journeys. I'm sure many of you have heard about these journeys that are taken with sacred plants, often done within the shamanic culture, or at least being overseen by adept shamans in this practice of taking this sacred plant, a hallucinogen, of course, which puts one in a completely altered state, and some may argue an altered dimension, another world or worlds. And I have heard clearly more than once, maybe even a half dozen times, of individuals who have had these experiences that invariably in the midst of the experience will encounter another being. This being will often be described as hideous, horrible. We'll call it non-human intelligence for argument's sake. But here's the kicker with this. Each and every time I've heard this story told of one being on an ayahuasca trip and being confronted by another a being, frightened as they may be initially, and invariably they are, the individuals that are on this trip, there's a point at which something clicks and they stare this being in the face and they realize, you're not real. Or they may go charging toward it. There's some epiphany that occurs, even in this very, very convoluted state, in which the individual has a realization that perhaps what they're seeing is somehow an externalization of their own psyche. Some semblance of that, let's say. Obviously, this is not the case across the board. However, there is some connection there. But invariably, the moment they do, the moment they have that epiphany, as brief as it may be, oftentimes this hideous creature, this non-human, will disappear. Or at a minimum, back off from whatever they're doing, whether they're charging at the person or whatever it is they're doing. So it takes me back to this idea when we see ourselves as we truly are. And again, forgive me if I'm offending, because I'm using this in the context of Anne talking about God. I'm talking about really anything that is beyond our understanding, that is invisible, that appears powerful and external to us. When we recognize ourselves for who we truly are, we understand that maybe none of it is external to us as we think. This is a conundrum for a lot of people, because I'm looking outside my window right now. Well, of course that's outside of me at this level, but at a deeper level, when we have that realization, is it? Or are we inextricably linked to all of this, including our ET contact experiences? as above, so below, as within, so without. There's obviously a paradoxical aspect to what I'm talking about here, because what I'm saying is that the experience is absolutely real. And actually, here's another quote where Whitley discussed, he was talking about that once we understand ourselves, we can begin to understand this phenomenon. And he says this phenomenon that is, and he underscored, very real and is outside of us, he said. But I say, or is it ultimately? This is the paradox. Very real and is outside and separate from us could be true, and yet very real and a reflection of us at the same time. Reality is a paradox. Both could be true. It's interesting that this paradoxical aspect of reality has come up recently in so many conversations that I've had, guest shows that I've had. So the words that come to mind here when we're trying to understand this phenomenon that is without question pervasive is self-acceptance, self-discovery, ambiguity, and paradox, and humility. These are all things that I think we need to remind ourselves of as we are courageously agreeing to travel and even traverse this very, very dicey road that we're talking about. This is what I wanted to get into today, and I'm not here to solve the problem, because I don't know that I can, but rather to pose the question and muse about it a little bit. I hope that what I was saying, or what I'm saying here, makes some bit of sense to you. Again, the bottom line is, I don't know that it's even worth trying to understand this anomaly of contact with non-human intelligence unless and until we first understand who we are. Then we can start to understand how we're connected to it. And then we may have the realization that we are of it. That we are of it. There was another point I wanted to make, but I think I'm going to hold off because I know we're running a bit. We're running into the 30-minute mark here, and I hadn't planned on going that long. These are just some things to ponder. Listen, please go back and, if you haven't already, and listen to my interview with Whitley in its entirety. It is a treat. It's such a pleasure. This was my first time having him on, and so many of us have known his work for so many years. He's written many books, not the least of which, of course, is his landmark Communion, but there's so many others that really dive more into the philosophical implications of these contact experiences that he has had. The thing that I love about him most is his, I said this at the top of the show, his measure of introspection over these very, very complex ideas and experiences. I say again and again and again, explore the mystery. If we do, I truly and fervently believe that the universe will at some point meet us halfway. I'm going to leave you with that. All right, journeyers, here we go. We're bulking up on shows. I hope you enjoyed this one. Stay tuned for another show next week where we will be featuring my colleague Miguel Mendonça, author of, we mentioned today, Meet the Hybrids and We Are the Disclosure, parts 1 and 2. Being with the Beings. We're going to be talking about Meet the Hybrids. We're going to stay on the ET contact phenomenon, but with a twist. We're going to talk about individuals who believe themselves to be part ET and part human. The rabbit hole deepens indeed. But in the meantime, chew on what we talked about here today. Let me know, as always, what your thoughts are on the matter. Let's stay open and humble, most importantly. This is a mystery indeed, but we are connected to it, and I do believe it is our birthright to explore. So let us continue the journey, shall we? I thank you for joining me for this episode of Conscious Commentary, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care, everyone.